Thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn over to Chandana.
Thank you. Welcome. We weren't going to have the Buddha's teachings if it hadn't been for some persuasion. And the suttas tell us of how the Brahma Sahampati, one of the beings in the highest Brahma realms, when he was able to see what the Buddha was thinking. This is right after his awakening, right after him experiencing Nibbana, full experience of awakening. And as the Buddha was pondering, considering, this Dhamma is very deep, it's very profound. It was even profound for me. So as he was thinking this, he realized at that moment that no one will get it. It's too much. No one will have the capacity of discernment to penetrate through the layers, the deep layers of the Dhamma. So he said, I'm not going to teach. At that moment, Brahma Sahampati, he saw what the Buddha was thinking. And he immediately came to earth, came at his feet, and he bowed down, paid homage to him, and he said, please, Lord, it has been way too long that humanity has been in the dark. This is the only opportunity they have. In fact, not even just humanity, the whole existence. Because devas, gods, and all beings, including humans, they need to hear the Dhamma. They're not liberated yet. And he reached out and he said, please, Lord, there are those beings with little dust in their eyes, who just need that extra nudge, they're right at the edge, the cusp, they're right there. All they need is the right instruction at the right moment, and boom. And he said, please, for the sake of those, I beseech you, do teach. And the Buddha, in his compassion, scans the entire existence, and he sees there's so many people who are ready, but they just have a thin layer of dust in their eyes. Eyes, obviously, is a metaphor for wisdom, and the dust is the ignorance, the layer of ignorance. And he also saw that there were many others with very, very thick layers of dust. But this was an opportunity for him to speak and to teach the Dhamma, and he said, yes, there's lovely stanzas, there's lovely poetic words there in the suttas, and where the Buddha is actually saying, and there's this exchange between Brahma Sahampati and the Buddha, talking, and one is convincing the Buddha, and the Buddha accepting. And he says, yes, for the sake of those I will teach. I often think about this, especially in relation to today's topic, which is on dependent origination. A topic that I have, stayed away from teaching in such a short time, because it does not do it justice. Usually it takes weeks, if not months, to fully delve into the dependent origination, because many teachers have abstained from teaching it because it's too vast, it's too complex, but at the same time it is at the core of the teaching. In fact, it's so important that the Buddha equated it, well, he said it this way: one who sees the Dhamma sees Paticcasamuppada, which is dependent origination. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. That's how deep it is. And that distinguishes Buddhism the Dhamma, from any and all kinds of religions out there, all kinds of philosophical schools out there, because it's emphasis on wisdom. Now be careful, because when we say wisdom in the West, we tend to think that it has to do with just pure rationality or intellectual efforts. It's not. It's not just that. Rationality has to be there, of course. However, it has to be validated in the laboratory of one's life, experienced through the practice of meditation. That's why the Buddha was not, and never was, never wanted to become a philosopher. India had some of the greatest philosophical schools at that time, and to this day, I would say, when you read their texts and see what they were philosophizing about. But the Buddha always discouraged them, pushed them away, and said, I'm not going to engage. That's not why I'm here. I'm teaching two things, he said. Suffering and the cessation of suffering. After that, after you become an arahant, go ahead, play with it. Play, just become a philosopher if you want to. Nobody did. Many of them actually ended up some of his greatest teachers. I mean, greatest disciples, I'm sorry. So, after the Buddha becomes awakened, for 7 days, he sits in front of the Bodhi tree, facing it, and just expressing his gratitude to this banyan tree that supported him as he became awakened. After the 7th day, in the first watch of the night, he pondered. He looked at dependent origination, at Paticcasamuppada, the first watch of the night, which goes from 6 p.m., around 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So he looked at dependent origination, but this time with a lot more detail. Now, when I say this time, many people have this misconception that the Buddha came to realize dependent origination right after he became awakened, for the first time ever, and that's not true. In the suttas, we see how the Buddha had pondered it, had thought about it. Okay, why is there old age? Why is there pain, suffering? Why is there lamentation, grief, and despair? Why? What's causing it? What brings about birth? What are some of the things that actually are resulting in birth to show up? So he was looking at these different links, what turned out to be the links eventually, but he did not have the wisdom yet to see clearly as to the different chain of reactions, if you will, the causations, which he termed it conditionality. In Pali, it's called paccaya. Because of this arises. Because of the ending of this, because of the cessation of this, that ceases. So during the first watch of the night, this is after he became awakened, 7 days have passed after his Nibbana, he ponders dependent origination, what we call it in direct form, in direct path, going forward. And in Pali, there's a beautiful term for this. It's anuloma. Anuloma is, if you've ever petted a cat or a dog or a furry animal, and you just go with your hand like this in the direction where the hair or the fur is growing, it's very smooth. There's no obstruction. That's anuloma. And that is how he looked at the links, starting with ignorance, avidya. He said, avidya paccaya sankhara. Ignorance brings about, causes, is the condition for generative causes or sankharas. Different translators have called it different things. For example, Bhikkhu Bodhi has called it different things over the course of the last 20 years. Formations come to mind, volitional formations, volitional actions even. Venerable Nyanananda, one of the greatest minds in the Dhamma, who recently passed away, he wrote the book Concept and Reality, by the way. Massively, incredibly powerful concise, pregnant with so much meaning kind of a book. And he termed sankharas as preparations. I know Ajahn Thanissaro calls it, I think, fabrications. The one that I have, based on my experience of them and understanding of the suttas, I have seen it to match more of this term, which basically I was inspired by one of my students who helped me with this. Generative causes. Generative causes. So ignorance produces generative causes, sankharas. And because of sankharas, we have vijnana that comes up. Vijnana, the Buddha listed several different kinds of vijnana. Consciousness. Different kinds of consciousness. And we typically, in the Dhamma, we have 6 kinds of consciousness that correspond with the 6 sense bases, 6 senses, 6 sense organs. The 6th one, in addition to the 5 sensory perceptions in the West, in Buddhism, the 6th is the mind itself, which perceives and conceives mind objects. Right now you're able to process what you are hearing based on the ability of manovinyana, or mind consciousness, which is taken in mind concepts, thoughts, ideas, words even. So, once we have vijnana, we get to this very interesting, often misunderstood, misinterpreted, mistranslated term, nama-rupa. Nama-rupa, some people have called it name and form. Another more palatable term for it could be something like mentality and materiality. Mentality and materiality. And they go hand in hand with consciousness. Consciousness, you remove consciousness, there's no nama-rupa. There's no, there's no name and form. Mentality, materiality. You remove name and form, you don't have consciousness. This was a dilemma for many students who came to the Buddha asking, how could that be? In both sides, like, it's either caused by this, and that's the end of it, but it can't be caused by, each other. And it gave the beautiful example of heat and luminosity of a lamp, a light source. They're dependent on each other. They go hand in hand. And similarly with nama-rupa and vijnana, which takes us, after mentality, materiality, we get these sense bases, the 6 senses. Salayatanam. So, nama-rupa paccaya salayatanam. Salayatanam are called the 6 sense bases, with which we get to experience, taste the world around us. So now we're getting closer and closer to, if you will, earth. We're coming down to something a little bit more tangible, more experiential for us. We can relate to these a little bit more. The mind likes these. Again, they're a little bit more palatable. Because of salayatanam, or the 6 sense bases, we get to experience the world, life, in the form of contact, or passa in Pali, passa. So far, so good. From passa, because of contact, there's feeling. Now the feeling takes place because of contact, but the contact took place because of the 6 sense spaces that have been picked up. The mind is translating all these bits of data that's coming in. The contact that took place in your ears requires all that we talked about so far, including vijnana, consciousness, including, obviously, the 6 sense spaces. So, to kind of flesh it out a little bit more, the Buddha gives the examples of eyesight, for example. The eye consciousness, he calls it. Often we get the eye consciousness and we look at it independently as if with anything else. Well, eye consciousness is the result of a couple of things coming together. And the Buddha explains this beautifully. He says, when you have a perfectly functioning eye, and you have forms, things that you can see, that could be seen, visible. When you put these two together, then you have consciousness. So this trio itself brings about contact. So earlier with the clap, one is a sound, and then you have the ear, perfectly functioning ear, which the Buddha calls the inner ear base. You can call it that. And then you put these together, and now you have ear consciousness. Now, ear consciousness facilitated you picking up this. That's the contact. Now, what was generated because of the contact is what we call is the next link. Hasso paccaya Vedana. Vedana is feeling. Now in the West we always have this misconception that feelings and emotions are the same. They're not. In Buddhism they're very clearly stated. The smallest number, they have many numbers by the way, but the smallest number is just 3. Pleasant, painful, and neither pleasant nor painful. Pleasant, painful, neither pleasant nor painful. So these are the primary 3 categories in which feeling can go into. So when we have feeling, this is when we're getting into some very shady territory. This is where things get a little bit more interesting as far as samsara is concerned, cycle of rebirth is concerned, misery and suffering is concerned. And what I mean by that is, because of our liking, disliking, or indifference to the feeling, we develop this thing called, which is the next link, craving, which the Buddha called it tanha. Tanha means, in Sanskrit, is trishna, both meaning thirst. I want more, I want more, I want more. Can I have some more? That lingering desire to have more of something is what many teachers say has to be cut. Right there. Because up to the feeling point, we were good. We were good to go. But the moment there is craving, that's when we develop whatever's coming in next, which is clinging, upadana. Upadana means clinging, grasping, holding on to that lovely, lovely feeling that we had. We want a repeat, thank you very much. And when you look at a person's life, that's the very thing. Craving and clinging is the reason, or are the reasons why a person ends up back in samsara again and again and again. And we've been doing this for eons, according to the teachings. So, because of clinging, which is upadana, there is bhava, which is becoming. Now we have the habitual tendencies to go ahead and say, I guess I'm all in. I'm in. I'm too dedicated. I'm now too committed. Now the energy is so powerful that it pulls a person to the next moment. By the way, a correction needs to be made about the way oftentimes dependent origination has been characterized. Unfortunately, many commentators, and I'm not just talking about the ones in 20th or 21st century, I'm talking about even centuries ago, they've misconstrued the teaching of the Buddha when it came to the dependent origination as well. Meaning, they took the 12 links of dependent origination and divided it into 3, meaning 3 different lifetimes. If you've ever studied any of the teachings of the Buddha, you know that he's very focused on you right now. How to get you out of this mess called samsara. How to get you out of suffering, period. Now. Not tomorrow. Now. He was a very pragmatic individual in that sense. He was a very conscientious, compassionate, to the point, kind of a teacher. He didn't want to mess around. He never did. However, when you bring in individuals who just are in love with their thoughts, with the interpretation of ideas, and never actually sit down and practice, I'm talking about mostly about commentators in general, they have taken the Dhamma, in this case the dependent origination, and divided the first two links into past life. Well, these are things that have to do with the individual's past life, meaning avidya paccaya sankhara, meaning because of ignorance we have sankharas, or generative causes, or formations. Because of that. But, hey, sorry, I mean, in this life you had nothing to do with that. That had to do with your past life. So basically, it's not in your hands kind of a deal. Which goes against every grain of wisdom that's found in the Dhamma. Has nothing to do with the Dhamma. Because now, it's not in our hands. And if you've ever heard me say before, in the Dhamma we're not gamblers. There's no probability. Everything is factual in your face right here in front of you to be tested. The Buddha says, Ehi passiko, come and test it out yourself. See it for yourself. So, I'll come back to that point quickly later, but when you have the becoming factors, or right after craving we have grasping or clinging, right after clinging we have becoming or bhava. Because of bhava we have jati. Jati means birth. Because of the becoming desire to go into the next moment, previously they used to describe this as the third part of the dependent origination, which has to do with your future life. Future life. So basically that too is not technically in your control, because it's going to happen in the future. So the person's tendency of becoming goes into and now drops into the womb in the form of jati or birth. And once you're born, guess what? There's death. You're stuck. I mean, even the Buddha once said to a man who came in, like, why do we suffer? Why do we die? Why do we die? And he said, were you born? The guy said, yeah. What kind of a question is that? Well, then you're going to die. That's it. Everything that has a beginning has an end, right? Now, because of death, the Buddha didn't stop there, by the way. He went further. He said, there's sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair follows this whole cycle. Now, he didn't just formulate, the Buddha was not just a formulator. He would give these distinct explanations so that he could explain it to us, in elaborating it to us, so that we can actually find our place where we are, how we can actually navigate our lives. And this is the point that his Nibbanic experience allowed him to do and see. He had known these links, as I mentioned earlier, before, when he was still a bodhisattva, still struggling in those 6.5 years. What he didn't have was his realization of the Four Noble Truths at the night of his awakening. That completely changed everything, because now he was able to see the link and asking, what is the origin of this link? For example, let's take clinging. Looking at clinging and looking at it and saying, okay, there is clinging. Just like dukkha, right? The Four Noble Truths, we start with dukkha, right? There is clinging here. There's upadana. What is the origin of upadana? Craving is. Just like in the case of dukkha, what's the origin? Craving. So because of craving, we have clinging. Now, the third noble truth comes in. There's a cessation of upadana. There's a cessation of clinging. That changed everything. Because he was no longer just seeing the links, he was actually seeing that there's a way beyond it. This is the second part of, the Buddha's teaching. The first is what? Suffering, and the second thing he teaches is cessation of suffering, the ending of suffering, and this is it. So he saw that upadana, or grasping, clinging, has an end. Now what is the end? This is where we come to the fourth noble truth, which is the way that leads us out of suffering. What is that? Anyone? Thank you. Eightfold path. This was a game changer. Because now the Buddha actually saw. He saw how each of these links come to be and how each of these links cease. And the second watch of that same night, where he did the forward motion of the dependent origination, he did the reverse. And the same, let's use the same example of the fur of the cat, the dog, or whatever. When you do it the opposite way, it doesn't go so smoothly, right? And in Pali, that's called patiloma. So anuloma and patiloma. And he said, okay, if what ceases, then clinging ceases. With the ceasing of what does clinging cease, basically? And he saw by the ending of craving, or tanha, clinging ceases. Okay, but by the ending of what does craving cease? How does it cease? By the ending of feeling. By the ending of what does feeling cease? Contact. Now each of these links themselves have ignorance in them. So if you remember, I mentioned briefly how some teachers have explained to me that you need to cut the link between craving and feeling. Right there, there's that link. Before it turns into craving, you need to cut it. Well, when you study the Dhamma, when you study the teachings and you look for it and you try to practice it and try to see it in your personal life in the form of the four foundations of mindfulness, you see how every link of these, every aspect of your life, in fact, has within it some tiny little tinge of ignorance. The first link of dependent origination is everywhere. Everywhere it can be identified, that is. The moment you identify it, there was once, the Buddha was explaining this to, I think it was Prince Bodhi Rajakumara Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, middle length discourses. And he says, because the prince is asking him, how long does it take for a person to get to to get to experience Nibbana? And the Buddha says, 7 years. He starts with that. And then he says, not 7 years, you don't have to be 7 years. He says 6. He drops it down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, half a year. No. 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, 1 month. And it drops all the way down to 1 day and 1 night. Remember earlier I was saying some people have misunderstood the dependent origination as being for 3 different lifetimes? Totally inadequate, to say the least. Has nothing to do with the Dhamma. It has to do with now. And what about the birth part? What are we talking about? The next birth? How's that? Birth of what? Every moment we're choosing. Every moment we're choosing, and there's a birth of action, whether it's in the form of a thought, a form of a speech, or a form of an action. Every moment. And that's what I mean earlier. I meant by earlier bringing in ignorance is found in every single link. When you identify the ignorance, and how do we identify? Remember the eightfold path? Right view. First, right intention, right speech, right action, right lifestyle, right effort, right mindfulness, right collectedness of mind. How can we negotiate this eightfold path into your life? It's like, in my mind right now, it's equivalent to putting a big fat spotlight on your present moment and how you're relating to a certain situation. Are you reacting to it automatically, blindly? Or are you giving right view a chance? Are you giving right speech a chance? Instead of going out blurting out a cuss word, or instead of reaching over and getting that shot of tequila, for example, you're being offered, and it's like everybody's making you feel bad because, hey, you're not joining in the party. Or participating in this useless chatter, or gossiping, or doing something even worse, lying. Because if you lie, you can do anything, the Buddha said. If you find yourself a liar, you find yourself a person who can do anything. The worst crimes. So this makes everything relatable, doesn't it? It brings this very complex principle of Paticcasamuppada, dependent origination, into our laps, into life, into your own choices, into your own freedom of knowing whether you're going to choose between the wholesome and the unwholesome. I mean, the Buddha explained this beautifully when he related back his own experience with choosing in the Vitakka, Vitakka Sutta, the two kinds of thoughts in Majjhima Nikaya, where he's talking about how as a bodhisattva, as a struggling bodhisattva, before he became a Buddha, he saw that he was having two kinds of thoughts. And he decided to make a pile for each. He said, this is going to be the unwholesome pot, I'm not going to touch that. And this is going to be the wholesome pot, I'm going to choose from that. Thank you very much, no more of the unwholesome. This is something I use every single day in my sessions with my patients. Every day. And I try to live by this myself. And I always encourage those around me to do that, because it's so simple. Now, can we do that? So, choosing between wholesome and unwholesome means you are abiding already by the Eightfold Path. Now, if you're using the Eightfold Path, that means you are bringing the element, the detergent drop of wisdom into, and dropping it into this bucket called ignorance, which is the backbone of every one of these links that we mentioned of dependent origination. Now, with that wisdom, all of a sudden what you're doing essentially disrupting this blind chain of events from occurring. Wow, talk about taking control of your life. So a few weeks ago I said, why do we choose Buddhism? Why are people becoming Buddhists? To me, if you remove this element, very crucial element, then there's no point in becoming a Buddhist. It's a joke. If there's no element of discernment in our lives, and there is no detectable difference in the quality of our lives, there's no sense of tranquility. There's no higher sense of, I'm not being pulled left and right, up and down with my old tendencies. I'm seeing them for what they are, and I'm choosing them. Oh, what is that? What is that that's happening in the back? Oh, that's tranquility. Guess what? That's a mini Nibbana. Mini. The more of these occur, you would be getting to a point that the Arahants lived in. And it's called, it's a kind of quality of the mind that's called Kiriya Chitta. You don't even make karma. It's a blissful state of mind. So, it's almost 12, but I'll give, thank you for listening. I mean, this does not do justice, even by a long shot, to the dependent origination, but I tried, given the constraints of time. However, I'll only allow one question, but doesn't sound right. But right after the ceremony, I'll be open, obviously, for more questions. Yes?
Thank you very much, Chandana, for your lecture. In this November, start the second retreat with you?
I'm actually waiting on Bhante Shanti to give me the okay for that. Any other questions? So yeah.
That's
No, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, right after. Yeah.
How is it seems like this model assumes that the person has like a well-functioning motivation, and by that I mean like people are depressed or suffer from depression or anxiety, like or seasonal depression or anxiety, right? Like, wouldn't it make it harder to actually be able to implement that model, to bring wisdom, to notice or be motivated to care about which pile, wholesome or unwholesome, and which pile you're pulling your thoughts from, because your very capacity to choose or to be motivated or to even have right view in that moment has just been compromised by mental health challenge.
You know the address to this center, right?
No.
How did you get here?
Oh, yeah, I know how to get here.
Okay.
All right.
All right. All right. You see someone in, let's say, where you live. Let's say you live in West LA. And you give this person who wants to come to the center the address, the directions. However, instead of following your directions, because of whatever reason, maybe they needed to go to the bathroom, maybe they had a change of heart, or whatever, they don't end up here. They end up somewhere else. And then you have another person who asks for the same directions, and you hand it over, the same thing to them, and they end up here. You look over and they're sitting right next to you. What was the difference? Did you have any control over that? Was there anything wrong with the directions? There you go. Remember earlier I said there are some people who have very, very little dust in their eyes, and some that have huge cakes, layers and layers of dust. This Dhamma is not for everyone. I know in this very integrated society that we're building, that almost sounds like, I don't know about that. Well, that's a fact. Different individuals are on different levels in their spiritual practice and understanding. So there isn't this idea of no child left behind in the education system. Remember when it started? Exactly. So, Venerable Shanti, yes?
You asked a medical question. There's no problem of having that treated as a medical question. Your path and your illness, I mean, it is part of your path, but deal with the illness as an illness and then continue your path.
Yeah, we can address the question after the ceremony.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Plenty of time after.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for a brilliant talk.
Thank you.
I'm glad we had it recorded.
Thank you.
Because it's the kind of talk you need to listen to.